In Sicily, women are more dangerous than shotguns. Mario Puzo, The Godfather. The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. Elena Vasquez had been awake already. She almost always was at that hour, sitting at the kitchen table of her small apartment in the South End of Boston, with a cup of tea gone cold and a medical journal she wasn't reading. Sleep had become a negotiation since her mother died, and most nights she lost. The apartment was quiet in the way that only winter apartments are quiet, the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that presses against the windows from outside like something alive. She answered on the second ring. "Dr. Vasquez?" The voice was not a question. "Speaking." She was already standing, some physician's reflex pulling her upright before her mind had fully engaged. "We need you." A pause, the kind of pause that had been rehearsed. "Someone recommended you. You treated a man named Caruso last spring. Bullet wound. No police report." Elena set down her mug very carefully on the counter. Her hand was steady. She had trained it to be. "I treat a lot of patients." "Of course." Another pause. "There's a car outside your building, black Suburban. The driver will wait 10 minutes. The line went dead. She stood in her kitchen for a moment, listening to the silence press against the glass. She thought about calling the police. She thought about not answering the door. She thought about Caruso, Miguel Caruso, who had come into the free clinic on Tremont Street with a through-and-through in his shoulder and cash in his coat and eyes that said, "Please don't ask." And she thought about the fact that she had not called the police then either, and about why. She put on her coat. The Suburban smelled of leather and something metallic, gun oil, she would later understand, though at the time she categorized it as machinery, as industry, as things that had nothing to do with her. The driver was a large man with a neck like a tree trunk who did not look at her in the rearview mirror and did not speak. The city slid past the tinted windows, the glittering wet of Boylston Street, the orange pools of streetlights on Commonwealth Avenue, then out across the river and north, into neighborhoods that grew quieter and larger the farther they went, until the houses became estates, and the estates became something else entirely. Properties that existed behind walls and iron gates and the careful darkness of old money. They stopped at a gate. Wrought iron, 12 feet high. The kind of gate that communicated something to people who could read such things. "Whatever happens behind me is none of your concern." The estate beyond it was Italian in its bones, stucco and terracotta, and a courtyard fountain that was not running in February, its basin white with frost. The main house was 3 stories of pale stone, every window dark except for 2 on the ground floor, which threw amber light onto the frozen gravel drive. A man in a dark suit met her at the car, young, tightly wound. "Dr. Vasquez, this way." Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and something floral, old roses, potpourri, the ghost of a woman's perfume. The entry hall was marble and dark wood, a curved staircase rising to the upper floors. Paintings on the walls, Italian landscapes, a Madonna in oil, a portrait of a man with heavy-lidded eyes who might have been anyone's grandfather. It was opulent without being ostentatious. Money that had forgotten what it cost. They moved quickly through a corridor and into a room that had been a study once. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, a desk as large as a lifeboat. but had been transformed tonight into something else. A man lay on the leather Chesterfield sofa against the far wall. Two other men stood back, watching. A woman in her 60s, small, dark-dressed, the housekeeper maybe, stood near the door with her rosary and her face carefully arranged into nothing at all. Elena crossed to the patient before she had fully registered the others. That was training. That was the discipline of emergency medicine. Find the crisis and go to it. The man on the sofa was unconscious. Mid to late 30s, she assessed immediately, though the pallor of blood loss aged him. Dark hair, a face that, even in extremity, had an authority to it. Sharp jaw, strong brow, the kind of bone structure that survives nearly everything. He was broad-shouldered, long, dressed in what had been an expensive shirt before someone had cut it open. The wound was left side, mid-abdomen. Someone had packed it, competently, actually, with clean linen, and there was an IV line in his left arm running fluids from a bag hung on a standing lamp. "Who put in the IV?" she asked, not turning around. "I did." One of the watching men stepped forward. 40, silver-haired, his suit jacket off and his sleeves rolled. "I was a medic, Army." She looked at the line. Good angle, good placement. She opened her bag. She'd brought the trauma kit, the one she kept packed and ready because she lived in the world she lived in. "Tell me what happened." "He was shot." "Flat." "I can see that." She was already cutting away the dressing, assessing the wound. Entry only, no exit, which meant the bullet was still inside. The packing had slowed the bleeding, but not stopped it. She needed imaging she didn't have, and an OR she didn't have, and 4 units of blood she didn't have. What she had was her bag, her hands, and the knowledge that if this man went to a hospital, there would be records, and records were apparently not something anyone here wanted. Single round, no exit. What caliber? "We believe 9mm. Time of injury? 90 minutes ago." She looked at the patient's colour, his breathing, his pulse. She had 2 fingers on his wrist, counting. Pulse was weak but present. BP low. "He needs surgery, a real OR." "That's not possible." She turned then, for the first time, and looked properly at the man who was speaking. Silver hair, as she'd noted, but also a quality of attention in his face that was unusual. A stillness. He looked at her the way chess players look at boards, calculating distances. "Then he may die," she said. "He will certainly die if you don't try." The man held her gaze. "We understand the risk. So does he. When he's conscious, he gives instructions. This is one of them." "He told you, in advance, not to take him to a hospital if he was shot?" "He told us many things in advance." Something like dark amusement moved through the silver-haired man's expression and was gone. "He is a cautious man." Elena turned back to the patient, the cautious man on the sofa. She looked at his face, really looked at it for the first time, properly, the way you look at something you're going to be responsible for. The strong jaw, the lashes dark against the white of his cheeks, a scar bisecting the left eyebrow, old, faded, another at the corner of his mouth. A man who had been in the vicinity of violence before and had survived it, and who had apparently planned for the next time. She made her decision. She had been making this decision for years. She had made it when she was 24, and her mother told her things about the family she came from. And she had made it again when she finished medical school and chose emergency medicine, because emergency medicine was where the desperate people came. She made it in increments, this decision, the decision to help when the only alternative was standing still while someone died. "I need more light," she said, "and I need someone to put water on to boil, and I need whoever else is in this room to get out." She worked for 3 hours. The bullet had lodged against the iliac crest, a lucky trajectory, all things considered, having missed the major vessels and the bowel by margins that suggested either divine intervention or very good luck. And Elena had stopped believing in divine intervention during her residency. She irrigated, she debrided, she sutured in layers with the supplies from her kit and additional materials the army medic, whose name was Gennaro, she learned, because he told her twice to stop calling him you, sourced from somewhere in the house. A first aid room, apparently. She didn't ask what else was in it. The patient regained partial consciousness around 4 a.m. He didn't speak, but he opened his eyes, dark eyes, she noted, very dark, the iris barely distinguishable from the pupil, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not fear, not pain, or not only pain. Something assessing. Even here, even in extremity, he was assessing. "You're going to be all right," she said, because it was what you said, and because she believed it was true, probably. He closed his eyes again. By 6 in the morning, she had done everything she could do. The bleeding was controlled. The wound was closed. He was on I-5 antibiotics. Gennaro had produced these from the same mysterious first aid room, along with morphine and an array of other pharmaceuticals that Elena chose not to examine too closely. He would need monitoring, real monitoring, for the next 72 hours at minimum. He would need blood work she couldn't run here. He would need more than she could give. She packed her kit. She washed her hands in the bathroom off the study. It was marble and gold fixtures and a soap dish shaped like a seashell, surreal in this context, and she dried them and looked at herself in the mirror. She was 31 years old, and she had spent the night doing emergency surgery on a stranger's kitchen floor. Except it wasn't a kitchen floor. It was a Chesterfield sofa in an estate north of Boston, and there were men outside the door with guns. She was her mother's daughter. This was apparently what that meant. When she came back into the study, the silver-haired man was waiting. He had a cup of coffee in each hand, and he held one out to her, and she took it because she needed it. "He's stable," she said, "for now. He needs monitoring, vitals every 2 hours, the antibiotic drip maintained, fluids. If he develops a fever over 38.5, if his blood pressure drops, if there's any sign of abdominal rigidity, you'll be here," the man said. Elena stopped. "Excuse me?" "Your things have been brought." He said it simply, the way you say things that are not negotiable. "You'll be comfortable. Rosa will see to it." "I have patience." She kept her voice level. "I have a job. I have Dr. Vasquez." He set down his own coffee on the desk. He was not threatening. He was simply clear. "You know who this man is." She looked at him. She thought about lying. She decided against it. "I know who the Conti family is." "Then you understand why you cannot leave." He picked up his coffee again. "When he is recovered, when it is safe, you will be returned to your life. You have our word." "The word of—" "My name is Gennaro Ricci," the man said. "I am the Don's consigliere. And yes, my word." Elena looked at the man sleeping on the sofa, the patient, the Don, this cautious man who had apparently planned for his own shooting and had not planned to survive it, lying in a hospital bed with a name on a chart. She looked at the still face, the dark lashes, the old scar through the eyebrow. Then she looked at Gennaro Ricci and said, "I want my own room, with a lock." "Of course." "And I want to call my hospital. I'll say I have a family emergency." A slight pause. "Of course." "And if he dies," she said, "I walk out of here, and no one stops me." Gennaro considered this. "If he dies," he said finally, "I suspect no one will be thinking about stopping you." She slept for 4 hours in a room that was not hers, pale blue walls, white curtains, a bed with linen that had been ironed, flowers on the dresser that she hadn't asked for, and woke to February light and the sound of the house breathing around her. Old houses breathe differently than apartments. They settle and expand. They carry memory in their walls. She checked on her patient. He was awake. He was lying very still in the way that experienced patients lie still. Not the stillness of the unconscious, but the conscious conservation of energy by someone who understands pain management. His eyes tracked to her the moment she entered the room, and that assessing quality was there again, that chess player attention. "Good morning," she said, because someone had to. "Doctor." His voice was rougher than she'd expected, lower, slightly accented, the Italian faint but present, the vowels given slightly more room than an American would give them. "Vasquez. Elena Vasquez, yes." "How bad?" "The bullet missed your major vessels. You lost significant blood, but we managed the bleeding. You're on antibiotics. You'll have pain for some time, and you'll need to limit movement for at least 2 weeks. But barring infection or complications—" She paused to take his pulse, looking at her watch. "You should recover." He watched her do it. He watched everything she was noticing. Nothing escaped that dark gaze. "Gennaro tells me you want to leave." "I want to go back to my job, yes." "Not yet." He said it without apology, without explanation. It was simply the shape of the thing. "You understand why." "Because I know your name. Because you know my face." His eyes didn't leave hers. Names are in newspapers. Faces are different. Elena sat in the chair she'd pulled close during the night's work and looked at him steadily. She was not going to be afraid. Fear was a reasonable response to this situation, but it was not a useful one, and she had learned long ago to be useful. "Marco Conti," she said. "Don of the Conti family, 3rd generation. You took over from your father 8 years ago. You're considered—" She paused, selecting the word. "Pragmatic, by the standards of your world." Something moved in his face, not surprise exactly, recalibration. "You know more than a doctor should." "I know more than most people about a lot of things," she said. "Your wound needs to be checked. Will you let me do that? Or is the Don of the Conti family going to refuse medical care out of pride?" A silence. Then, and she would think about this moment later, turn it over in her memory, the way you turn over something that catches the light. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one, maybe. The suggestion that such a thing existed somewhere in him, that it was not entirely hypothetical. "Do your job, doctor," he said. The Conti estate had a name, Via Sirena. Elena learned this from Rosa, the housekeeper, who told her most of what she learned in those first days, because Rosa was the kind of woman who communicated through offering things, food, information, small observations delivered with the casualness of someone shelling peas, and who had apparently decided, with the swift practicality of a woman who had survived 3 generations of Contis, that the doctor was going to be staying a while and might as well know how things worked. "The Don's grandfather built it," Rosa told her, setting a breakfast tray on the kitchen table the second morning. 1948. He came here with nothing, the way they all did, and then he had everything. And this is what he built. She surveyed the kitchen, the high ceilings, the copper pots, the window overlooking the frozen garden, with an expression that contained the entire history of what that sentence meant. "The name is a joke, I think. Serena. Nothing serene ever happened in this house." "What did happen?" Rosa gave her a look, the look of a woman who has answered questions carefully for 50 years. "The usual," she said, and turned back to the stove. Elena ate and watched the garden. There was a man patrolling the perimeter, not conspicuously. He moved like he was simply walking, but the pattern was regular, and the earpiece was visible when the light caught it at the right angle. Another man at the gate. She had counted at least 6 in the house or on the grounds, probably more she hadn't identified yet. The house was a fortress pretending to be a home, and the pretending was good. Rosa's flowers and the ironed linen and the cooking smells and the Madonna on the landing, but it was pretending. She went to check on her patient. The rhythm of those first days established itself with the logic of captivity, which is its own kind of logic. You find the shape of the cage, and you learn to move in it. Elena checked Marco Conti's vitals every 2 hours. Blood pressure, pulse, temperature, the wound. And in between, she had the run of the house, which was more run than she'd expected. The library, the garden, frozen but walkable, a sitting room with a television she didn't use, her room with its blue walls and white curtains and the lock she had asked for, which functioned. What she did not have was her phone. Gennaro had facilitated her call to Mass General. She used the landline in his office. He sat across the desk and did not pretend he wasn't listening. But her own phone had been taken at the gate the first night, quietly, without discussion, and had not been returned. She understood why. She didn't argue about it. She stored the fury of it somewhere cold and useful inside herself, where she kept such things. Marco was a difficult patient. Not in the way she'd expected. He didn't rage or demand or refuse treatment. He was worse than that. He was compliant, in the way that powerful men are compliant when they've decided to be compliant. Which is to say that he tolerated her presence and her examinations with a kind of cold patience that communicated, beneath its surface, that this was a temporary arrangement of his choosing, and he was simply enduring it. He answered her medical questions in full. He did not answer other questions at all. On the 3rd day, she found him sitting up when he shouldn't have been. "Lie down," she said from the doorway. "I've been lying down for 3 days. You had abdominal surgery performed on a sofa. Lie down." He looked at her. He did not lie down. He was holding a phone, a different one from whatever had been confiscated, this one thin and dark, and there was something in his expression that was new. Not pain, or not only pain, but frustration, which was interesting because she would not have predicted that his face was capable of it. He seemed too controlled for frustration. "Something's happened," she said, reading him. A pause. "Nothing that concerns you. Everything in this house concerns me right now. I'm stuck here." She came into the room and checked his drip out of habit, the line, the bag, the insertion site. "You're feverish," she said, touching his forehead without asking permission. He let her. His skin was warm. Not dangerously so, not yet. "I need you lying flat. I need to make calls." "You can make calls lying flat." Another silence. He was weighing things. She could see him doing it, that calculating quality working behind his eyes. Then he moved, slowly, carefully, the discipline of a man who understood that concession to necessity was not defeat, and lay back against the pillows. The phone he held against his chest like something he was protecting. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." She settled in the chair. "But you'll do it for you, which is fine. Your body doesn't care about your reasons." She opened her medical notebook. She'd found a blank one in the desk in the blue room and made a note of the temperature. 102.1. We're watching the trend. If it goes above 38.5, you told me. Then tell me you're listening. He looked at the ceiling. Something moved through his expression that might have been, in a different man, exasperation. "I'm listening, Doctor." She wrote. He was quiet. Outside, the February wind moved through the pines at the property's edge and made a sound like the sea. "Why did you become a doctor?" he asked. She looked up. It was the first personal question he had asked her. "Because I'm good at it," she said. "Everyone's good at something. That's not why." She held his gaze for a moment. "No," she said, "it's not." And she went back to her notes and didn't answer, and he didn't press her. And that was how it went. That particular question, that particular silence, hanging between them. Gennaro Ricci came to her on the fourth day. He came to the library where she was reading, actually reading finally, not because she was at peace with her situation, but because she had exhausted the alternatives to reading, had walked the garden 3 times, had reorganized her medical kit, had lain on the blue room bed staring at the ceiling long enough to understand that she could either go slowly insane or she could read. The library was good. Whoever had assembled it had taste. Lampedusa and Shasha, alongside Hemingway and McCarthy, and a very old edition of Dante with illustrations that she'd been working through since the second day. Gennaro sat across from her without being invited and crossed his legs and was silent for a moment in that practiced way of his. "He's improving," he said. "Yes, the fever broke this morning. I'm cautiously optimistic about the wound healing without further complication." "You're a good doctor." "I know." He almost smiled at that. He didn't want a doctor brought in at all, he said. "I want you to understand that. I made the decision, and then he was conscious enough to confirm it. But my first instinct was right. Without you, he would have died." Elena set her book down carefully. "Is this leading somewhere, Mr. Ricci?" "Gennaro." He unfolded his hands. "It's leading to honesty, Dr. Vasquez, which is not something this house is always built for, but which I think you deserve. You're here against your will. You will be returned to your life. That is not in doubt. But I want you to understand the shape of what you've entered." "The Conti family," she said. "What we are," he said, "and what the situation is." He leaned forward slightly. Someone tried to kill Marco. Not an ordinary attempt. This was coordinated. It required information about his movements that not many people have, which means someone close to the family, or someone who has bought someone close to the family. He paused. "Until we know who, Everyone outside these walls is a risk, including anyone who knows that Marco is vulnerable, including me, including you, which is why your phone has been held, which is why you're here. He met her eyes. But also why, Dr. Vasquez, you may be safer here than you would be elsewhere. Whoever planned this is still out there, and they know a doctor was called. Elena absorbed this. She was good at absorbing things. Her mother had trained her for it, though her mother would not have called it training. You think I'm in danger? I think caution is appropriate. And the people who tried to kill him, do you have a name? Gennaro's expression shifted slightly, just slightly. We have a suspicion. Volkov, she said. The shift again, more significant this time. He looked at her the way Marco looked at her, that recalibration, that reassessment. Where did you hear that name? I didn't hear it. Rosa mentioned that a Russian family has been expanding in the past year. And you have a photograph on the Don's desk. The man in it has Bratva tattoos on his hands. She paused. I notice things. It's part of the job. Gennaro was quiet for a long moment. Then, you are not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more afraid. Elena picked up her book again. I'm afraid, she said. I'm just not going to show you. She found her page. Tell me when Marco's next vitals are due. I'd like to finish this chapter. She found the portrait on the 5th day. It was on the upper landing, the 2nd floor, the part of the house she hadn't been to. There was no prohibition, she simply hadn't had reason. But on the 5th morning she climbed the stairs looking for Rosa, who had mentioned leaving fresh towels, and instead of towels she found the portrait gallery. The Conti men, 3 generations of them, in oil and in silver photograph frames. The grandfather, barrel-chested, silver-haired, even in what must have been middle age, a face like a fist. The father, slimmer, more elegant, with the same heavy-lidded eyes she'd seen in the painting downstairs. And Marco, younger in the portrait, not yet Don, but already carrying that quality of contained force in the way he stood, something in the set of his shoulders. He was standing in a garden. This garden, she realized, or this garden in summer, the fountain running. He was not smiling, but there was something in his expression that was not yet the man on the sofa, something that hadn't yet been closed off. Beside the Marco portrait, a younger man, similar bone structure, the same dark eyes, but everything softer, turned upward at the corners, smiling easily, the way that Marco did not smile. He wore his suit the way young men wear suits when they haven't yet learned to be uncomfortable in them. My brother. She turned. Marco was in the doorway. He had climbed the stairs, which he absolutely should not have done. She started to say so and stopped, because his expression as he looked at the portrait of the younger man was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face, and interrupting it seemed wrong. He should rest, she said instead, quietly, meaning the painting. Salvatore. His voice was different, lower. Salvo. He's in Rome. He looked at the portrait for another moment. He doesn't know I was shot. I don't want him to know. Why? Because he would come back. He said it simply, and this isn't a safe place to be. Elena looked at the portrait of the young man who looked like a softer version of the man behind her. He's not part of the business? I kept him out of it. A silence. As much as possible. She turned to face him. He was pale. The stairs had cost him. "You need to go back to bed." I needed to walk. You needed to stay horizontal for at least another week. She moved toward him, assessing his color, his breathing. He let her take his arm without comment. "You're going to undo everything I fixed." "You fixed it very well," he said, and the faint dryness in his voice was new, not warm exactly, but something adjacent to it, a willingness to make the shape of a joke. It would be a shame to waste it. She walked him back to the stairs, keeping her hand on his arm. He didn't lean on her, but he didn't pull away either. She felt the solidity of him, even diminished by blood loss and injury. There was a substantiality to this man that was almost architectural. He was built like something that expected to last. "The portrait of your grandfather," she said, to keep him talking as they descended slowly. "He came from where?" "Palermo." He took the steps carefully. 1946. He had a fishing boat, a wife, and a name that meant nothing. He built something. A pause. Or built something into something else. Is that how you think of it? Building? That's how he thought of it. His voice was careful. I don't romanticize it. What do you think of it as? They reached the bottom of the stairs. He stopped and looked at her with those very dark eyes. Inheritance, he said. You don't choose what you're born into. You only choose what you do with it. She thought of her mother. She thought of what she'd been told when she was 24 and her mother was dying, and the truth came out in pieces late at night in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and endings. No, she said quietly, you don't. She walked him back to his room and checked his wound and his vitals and said nothing more about fathers or inheritance or choice, and he did not ask her again why she had become a doctor. He arrived on the 7th day without warning. Elena was in the kitchen with Rosa when she heard the car, the crunch of gravel, the particular quality of arrival, and then voices in the entry hall, one of them new, unfamiliar, lighter than the voices she'd learned in 7 days, faster, touched with an energy that the house didn't usually contain. She heard Marco's voice, even through 2 walls and a corridor. Not the words, but the tone, which was a tone she hadn't heard him use before. Different, less controlled. Rosa was making soup and appeared to notice nothing. He'll want feeding, she said, meaning whoever had arrived. They always want feeding. Elena went to see. Salvatore Conti was 29 years old and looked like his portrait, except more so. The easy smile was present and in use. The dark eyes were moving around the room with the quick pleasure of someone returning to somewhere they love. The expensive Roman suit was slightly dishevelled from travel. He was shaking hands with one of the guards, clapping him on the shoulder, asking after someone's mother, with the specific warmth of someone who actually remembers the names. Marco was in the doorway of the study. He shouldn't be standing. Elena was already making the mental note, and his face had done something extraordinary. It had opened, just slightly, just enough. There was something in his eyes when he looked at his brother that had not been there before. That portrait, she thought. That's what was in the portrait. Then Salvatore saw her. The smile turned toward her with the full force of its attention. "Well," he said, "you must be the doctor." He crossed the room in 4 strides and extended his hand. "Salvatore Conti, You saved my brother's life, which means I owe you a considerable debt. Elena Vasquez. His handshake was warm and firm, and he held it a beat longer than necessary. You weren't supposed to come. No. He glanced at Marco. But here I am. He looked back at Elena, and something shifted in the smile. Less performance, more genuine inquiry. He told me nothing, of course. I found out from a contact in Boston. He was furious that I came. He said this with complete equanimity. He's always furious at me. It's practically how we communicate. I'm not furious, Marco said from the doorway, and his voice was dry as parchment. You're furious, Salvatore said cheerfully. It's your love language. He turned to Elena. How is he? Truthfully, not the version he's been giving me. Elena looked at Marco. Marco looked back at her, his expression giving her nothing, which was itself a kind of answer, because it confirmed that he had been giving his brother a sanitized version. He's recovering well, she said carefully. The wound is healing, the fever is gone. He needs rest and limited activity for at least another week, and monitoring for infection. She paused. He pushes too hard. Has he always, Salvatore said, the grammatical oddity of it, not a question, landing with precision. And she understood that this was the specific, intimate shorthand of siblings who have spent a lifetime watching each other. Come inside, Marco said, and his voice had something in it that was neither command nor request, but some third thing, something that belonged only to this dynamic. And stop performing for the doctor. I never perform, Salvatore said, already moving. Everything about me is entirely genuine. Dinner that night was the strangest thing Elena had experienced in a strange week. Rosa made food enough for 10 people. Braised lamb, a pasta that smelled of the sea, bread that came from somewhere, some relationship between the estate and a bakery she'd never seen. They sat in the dining room, Marco at the head of the table, Elena to his right, where she had been put because she was the doctor and proximity to the patient was professional. Salvatore across from her, Gennaro at the far end like a punctuation mark. The guards ate elsewhere. The house breathed. Salvatore talked. He talked about Rome, a gallery opening, a politician's wife who'd said something indiscreet, the renovations at a church he loved, the best coffee in the world still being at a particular bar on Via del Corso. He talked with his hands and with his face and with his whole body, filling the space of the dining room with a kind of warmth that Elena realized only slowly was deliberate. He was managing the atmosphere. He was good at it. So good that it took her until the second glass of wine to understand that it was a skill, practiced and deployed, and not just his natural exuberance. She watched Marco across the table. He was watching his brother too, in that way of his, that assessing, chessboard attention. But there was something underneath it that was not calculation, something that was simply glad. He ate more than he had all week. His colour was better. You're studying us, Salvatore said to her. She hadn't realized she'd been caught. I study people, occupational habit. And what have you concluded? About what? He gestured between himself and Marco with his fork. The famous Conti brothers, the great dynasty. His tone was lightly self-mocking. What does the outside observer see? Salvo, Marco said quietly. She's going to go back to her life eventually, Salvatore said, not unkindly. She might as well know the picture. He looked at Elena. He worries about me. He has since we were children. He thinks the world is dangerous. A pause, waited. He's not wrong, but he thinks he can keep me outside of the dangerous part, that there's an outside. There is, Marco said. There was, his brother said gently. There was, once. The lightly mocking quality was gone now. He was looking at his brother with an expression that contained, in a single glance, everything he had just described: the worry, the love, the grief of having grown up in a world that did not have an outside. "And I love you for building it," he said. "I do. But it's getting smaller, Marco." A silence fell over the table. Gennaro was looking at his wine. Rosa, coming in with more bread, read the silence and retreated. "It will hold," Marco said. His brother looked at him for a moment more. Then the smile returned. Different now, the real version, a little sad. "All right," he said. He turned to Elena. "Tell me about yourself, Dr. Vasquez. Were you from Boston?" "No," she said. "New York originally. Family there?" "My mother passed 2 years ago. She was the only family I had." She said it evenly, the way you say it after 2 years of practice. Salvatore's expression shifted into something she recognized as genuine sympathy, not the performed kind. "I'm sorry," he said. "What was she like?" The question surprised her. Most people said, "I'm sorry," and moved on. She was, she paused, finding the right word, complicated. She had a big life before I was born, and she never quite fit it into the small one she ended up with. But she was smart, ferocious in her way. She felt Marco's eyes on her. She didn't look at him. "Mine was quiet," Salvatore said. "Our mother. Quieter than everything around her. She kept roses. There's still roses in the garden in summer." He glanced at his brother. "Marco takes care of them personally, won't let anyone else." She did look at Marco then, and he was looking at his wine, and his face was doing nothing at all. The careful nothing that she had come to understand was a kind of response. After dinner, she walked the garden in the cold. She did this most evenings. The perimeter patrol had learnt to accommodate it, and she had learnt to not notice them, a mutual fiction that served everyone. The garden was beautiful, even in February. The structure of it, the low boxwood hedges, the gravel paths, the bare arms of climbing roses against the south wall, evident even under the thin frost. She could imagine what it looked like in summer. She could imagine someone kneeling beside the roses with his sleeves rolled. She didn't hear him approach. She had been here a week, and she had noticed that he moved quietly for a man of his size. Not trying to, apparently, just naturally so. Some quality of his body that had trained itself into silence. "You shouldn't be outside," she said without turning. "It's below freezing." "I have a coat." He came to stand beside her. He did have a coat. Heavy, dark wool, and he was moving better today than he had been, the stairs this afternoon notwithstanding. The amber light from the house fell across the garden and caught the frost on the gravel. They stood in silence for a moment that was, she noticed, not uncomfortable. That was new. "My brother likes you," he said. "Your brother likes everyone." "No." He said it simply. He performs liking everyone. When he actually likes someone, it's different. He asks them about their mother. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the rose wall. The scar through his eyebrow was more visible in this light. "He's not involved in the business," she said. "You said, as much as possible." He echoed what he'd said on the stairs. He knows what we are. He's not blind. But he lives in Rome, and he studies architecture, and he keeps separate. You make that possible. I try. Something in his voice that was not quite ease, something in him that was never quite ease, she was beginning to understand. He carried everything at a slight tension, like a string that has been tuned up. It's the only thing I've built that I'm... He stopped. That you're proud of, she offered. He looked at her then, direct. The chess player eyes with something underneath the calculation that she was starting to recognize, starting to name, though she hadn't named it yet. That I'm not ashamed of, he said. The distinction landed on her. She absorbed it. A man who had thought carefully about shame, who had separated his construction of the world into the category of what I'm not ashamed of, and left the rest, implicitly, in the other column. That's something, she said. It's enough, he said, and looked back at the roses, and they stood there in the cold until she said he needed to go in, and he went in, and she stayed a little longer in the garden, alone with the frost and the dark, and the shape of the thing that was happening to her, which she had not yet allowed herself to name either. She found the files on the 9th day. She was not looking for them, that is the truth, and she held to it then and later, because she had enough to account for without adding that. She was looking for a pen. She had gone through the library and the sitting room and her blue room desk and had found nothing that wrote, and Rosa was somewhere in the garden, and she tried the study. The study was not her room, and she knew it, and she didn't stay. She found a pen on the side table, an expensive thing, heavy in the hand, a gift from the look of it, and she was leaving when she saw the photograph on the desk. It was not the photograph of Volkov she had noticed before. That was still there. This was different, a new photograph, placed on top, printed on plain paper from a printer. A surveillance photograph, clearly. Grainy, slightly blurred, taken from distance. Two men in conversation on what appeared to be a Boston street corner. Winter, the background smudged by cold air. She would not have stopped. She would not have looked. But one of the men in the photograph was her father. She knew his face from a photograph her mother had kept for 30 years in a box at the bottom of her closet. The box Elena had not been meant to see, the box she'd found when she was 17, and her mother had sat her down and told her the parts of the truth that could be told to a 17-year-old. More had come later, when she was 24 and her mother was dying. The full inventory of the thing. Her father's name was not a Conti name. He was not Italian. He moved in a different world entirely, or had moved in it. For all she knew, he was dead. Her mother had not had contact with him in 30 years and had not wanted to. She was looking at him in a surveillance photograph on Marco Conti's desk. She put the photograph back exactly where it was. She walked back to the library with the pen and sat down and did not read anything for a long time. Her father's name was Alexei Sorokin. Her mother, Carmen Vasquez, 22 years old and in New York on a student visa from Mexico City, had met him in 1990 at a party in Soho that she had no business attending and that he had been at for professional reasons, though she hadn't understood that until later. He was 30 and beautiful in the way of men from cold places, all cheekbones and pale eyes, And he spoke 4 languages and appeared to be in international finance, which in 1990 meant several things, and she had not, for several months, understood which of those things it meant. When she understood, she left. She was pregnant. She went home to Mexico City. She came back to New York 3 years later because she was stubborn, and because she had a daughter to raise, and because America was where her daughter could become something she chose. She never told Elena's father that Elena existed. She never contacted him again. She told Elena this in pieces: the party, the man, the leaving. Then, at 24, the rest, what he was. A name that moved in certain circles. Sorokin, her mother had said, in that hospital room that smelled of endings. Remember that name. If it ever comes near you, be careful. 2 years later, Elena Vasquez had moved to Boston and built a life from careful pieces and kept her mother's advice like a stone in her pocket. The name had not come near her until now. She was sitting in the garden the next morning, so cold she could not feel her hands, when Marco found her. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and something moved between them, some current of the thing that had been building in the cold, and in the amber light, and in late-night conversations, and in the silence he shared like a room. But what moved between them now was different. He could see that something was wrong. She could see that he could see it. "Come inside," he said. "In a minute. Now." Not an order, or not only an order. She looked at his face and saw the thing she had seen when he looked at the roses, and she got up. In the study, his study, where she had found the photograph and had not told him and was still deciding what to do about that, she sat in the chair she always sat in, and he stood by the window with his arms crossed and the morning light catching the old scar. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing happened. Elena." It was the first time he had used her name. It hit her differently than she expected, the sound of her name in his voice, in that slight accent. "Don't." She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about her mother. She thought about secrets and what they cost. Carried alone for 30 years, shaped like a stone you can't put down. "I saw a photograph on your desk," she said, "yesterday when I came to get a pen." His expression did not change. He had a great talent for this, the unchanged expression over the working mind. He was doing it now. "Which photograph?" "The surveillance one. The 2 men on the street corner." She held his eyes. "I know the man on the left." A silence that felt very long. "How do you know him?" "He's my father." She said it flatly, the way you say a thing you've said to yourself enough times that the shock has worn off the syllables. "I've never met him. My mother left him before I was born, but I know his face." She paused. "His name is Alexei Sorokin." The quality of the silence changed. She watched Marco's face do something she had not seen it do. Go very still. In a way that was different from his usual stillness, a way that was almost the stillness of shock, quickly controlled. His eyes moved away from her face and then back. He uncrossed his arms. He was thinking very fast and very hard, and she could almost see the structure of it. "Say the name again," he said quietly. "Alexei Sorokin." She held his gaze. "You know it." "I know it." He moved from the window, not toward her but across the room, turning his back for a moment, a gesture she was learning to read as the need to think without being watched. Then he turned around. "How long have you known who your father is?" "Since I was 17. My mother told me pieces, more when she was dying." She paused. "She told me to stay away from that name. Your mother was wise. He sat down across from her, the desk between them which felt deliberate, like he was re-establishing something, some structure, some controlled space. Alexei Sorokin is... He stopped, working out how much to say. He is not a simple man. He is connected to the Volkov organization, but not as a subordinate. He is... A pause. Adjacent. Old school. He doesn't fit neatly. Is he the one who tried to kill you? Marco looked at her steadily. That is what I'm trying to determine. And I walked into this house, not knowing that my father might be... She stopped. The absurdity of the sentence, its impossible neatness, stopped her. The world is smaller than people think, he said, not without something like bitterness. Always smaller. She stood up. She needed to stand up. Does this change things? She heard the controlled fear in her own voice and hated it. For me, being here. It complicates things. He said it carefully, not cruelly. Elena, if Sorokin knows you're here, he doesn't know I exist, she said. My mother made sure of it. He may know of you, a daughter in Boston. Your last name is different, but... He was working through it, that fast, structured thinking. It's a coincidence that has teeth. I'm not... She stopped. She started again. I am not his. I am my mother's daughter. I don't have anything to do with him. I know that. His voice had changed. The careful management of it had shifted, and underneath was something else, something direct, almost gentle. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm saying that in this world, blood means something, whether you claim it or not. And if Sorokin understands the chain of coincidence, that the doctor I called has his blood, he will use it. As leverage over me or over you? Both, he said. Possibly. They looked at each other across the desk. She felt something in her chest that was not fear exactly. She had identified fear and shelved it, but was something adjacent to it, something that knew itself to be important. She was standing in the middle of the thing her mother had warned her about. The name, the world, the impossible, specific gravity of it. Tell me what you need from me, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Nothing, he said. Yet. I need you to continue doing what you're doing, keeping me alive, which you have done well, and to tell me if you hear or see anything that seems relevant. And in exchange? In exchange, he said, I will tell you what I know about Alexei Sorokin. A pause. If you want to know. She thought of her mother's box at the bottom of the closet. The photograph, face down for 30 years, the names and the silence and the weight of it all. Yes, she said, I want to know. And he told her. What he told her about Alexei Sorokin took the better part of an evening. He told it without theatre, without emotion, in the way that she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. The particular register he used when he was being honest, which was flatter than his silence and more precise than his commands. He sat across the desk from her in the amber light of the study, and he laid it out like a case file, and she listened and took nothing down because she was afraid that writing it would make it too real. Alexei Sorokin had been, in 1988, a mid-level figure in the Soviet shadow economy, the kind of man who moved money between places it wasn't supposed to go, who knew people on both sides of things that had only one official side. When the union collapsed, he had been young enough and flexible enough to become something else. He moved to the United States in 1991. He built a network, not purely criminal, not purely legitimate, the way smart operators never were. Import, export, finance, the spaces between institutions where a man with his particular skills could be very useful to several competing parties simultaneously. He was, Marco said, connected to the Volkov family the way a contractor is connected to a builder. He provided services, he maintained deniability. He was not a soldier, and he was not a boss. He was something harder to deal with than either. And he had, for the past 18 months, been systematically building a position in Boston. "That's why you have the photograph," Elena said. "I had the photograph because I was building a picture of the Volkov network. I knew the man on the left was a Sorokin. I didn't know his first name until now." He looked at her steadily. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I didn't tell you on purpose." She paused. "I told you because I couldn't not tell you. That's different." "I understand the difference." She believed him. "The attempt on your life," she said. "Was it Volkov, or was it Sorokin, or were they working together?" "That," he said, "is the question." He stood and went to the window, this habit of his, moving to windows as if outdoor darkness was more honest than the amber of lamplight. "Volkov is aggressive. He wants territory. He has moved into 3 cities in the past 2 years using the same pattern. Destabilize the existing organization, fill the vacuum. He's not subtle." A pause. "Sorokin is subtle. The shot that hit me was not a Volkov operation. Too clean, too well informed." "So Sorokin arranged it?" "Sorokin, or someone who works for Sorokin, or someone who Sorokin sold information to." He turned from the window. "Which is why I need to know who in my organization gave him that information, who sold my route that night." "A traitor," she said. "A traitor." He said the word the way other men say something obscene, with a flatness that contained enormous feeling underneath. "Someone in this house, or someone with access to it. Someone who has eaten at my table." She thought of the dinner, Rosa's braised lamb, Salvatore's stories, Gennaro's punctuation mark at the end of the table. She thought of the guards who had treated her cautiously and then routinely, who had learned the hours of her garden walks. "You have a suspicion," she said. "I have several." His jaw was tight. "And no proof. And until I have proof, I can't move." He looked at her directly. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? Why you are still here?" She did. She was assembling it, the architecture of the situation, its load-bearing walls. He was unable to move because he didn't know who to trust. He was unable to return to his ordinary operations because he was not healed. He was keeping the circle small, this house, this handful of people, while he worked out which of the bricks in his foundation were hollow. "You're more vulnerable right now than you've ever been," she said. "Yes." "And you've told me this?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "Because you're here. Because you're your mother's daughter and not your father's. Because—" He stopped. The same stop as on the stairs when he'd said, "not ashamed of." The same measuring of what to give. "Because you need someone you can trust," she said, finishing the thought carefully, keeping her voice clinical because it needed to stay clinical. "And you've decided that I'm safer to trust them most because I don't benefit from your death?" Something in his expression. "That's one reason," he said, and left the others unexpressed. and she left them there too, and they sat in the amber light with the shape of the thing between them that neither of them was willing to name. Salvatore found her in the library at midnight. She heard him before she saw him. He was always slightly louder than the house, a brightness that leaked from room to room. He came in with 2 glasses of wine, and the kind of expression that meant he had already decided what the conversation was going to be about. "You know," he said, setting a glass in front of her. "Know what?" He sat across from her and looked at her with the dark eyes that were his brother's eyes, turned to a different register. "That this is more complicated than a doctor caring for a patient." She picked up the wine. "I'm a hostage who is also providing medical care." "You're not a hostage anymore." He said it simply. "You haven't been, really, since the second day. You could have made noise. You could have signaled somehow. You've been here a week and a half, and you've chosen to stay." He tilted his head slightly. "Why?" She drank. The wine was Italian, red, very good. "Because it's safer here than out there right now." "Partly," he agreed. "And?" "And I have a patient who needs monitoring." "Also partly." She looked at him. He looked back with the patient confidence of someone who knows they're right. "Your brother," she said carefully, "is—" "Yes," said Salvatore. "He is." He picked up his own wine. "I'm not saying this to cause problems or to push anything. I'm saying it because I know him, and I've been watching the way he is with you, and he is not like himself." A pause. "Or maybe he's more like himself, the self he was before he became the Dom." He turned the glass in his hands. "When he became Don, he closed, you know? Like a window in winter. Efficient, necessary. The warmth still inside, but you can't feel it from outside." He looked at her. "You are apparently a different kind of cold." "I'm not cold," she said, though she understood what he meant. "Medical cold," he said. "Productive cold, the kind that preserves things." He smiled, the real one, the slightly sad one. "He trusts you. And my brother doesn't trust anyone anymore. He used to. He was built for it. He was warm. He stopped. Someone used it. Someone used his trust, years ago. And he closed the window." A pause. "I've been trying to get it open for 8 years." "I'm his doctor," she said. "I'm not—" "I know." Salvatore held up a hand. "Not dismissing, accepting. I know. I'm only telling you what I see. What you do with it is entirely your business." He stood, finishing his wine. "He'll probably never say anything himself. He's incapable. He speaks about 30% of what he thinks and probably less of what he feels." He set down the glass. "Good night, Dr. Vasquez." "Elena," she said. The smile. The real one. Elena. He went to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "He takes care of the roses himself," he said. "If you didn't already know what that means, I'm telling you now." He left. She sat with her wine and the Dante and the amber light and the shape of the thing, which she finally, quietly, in the privacy of midnight, allowed herself to name. The traitor made contact on the 11th day. Gennaro came to her room in the mid-morning, looking more contained than usual, which was saying something. He closed the door. "Captain Ferrara called," he said. "Aldo Ferrara, Boston PD." She waited. "He called on a line that he shouldn't know. He asked about a woman being kept at the estate." Gennaro's face was very careful. A doctor. Elena felt the cold move through her. Someone told him I'm here. Someone told him, yes. He sat in the chair by her window. Ferrara is not entirely independent. He has relationships with several organizations. A pause. He's been on our payroll. And you think he's been turned? I think someone has offered him more. He looked at her directly. If Ferrara knows you're here, if he knows the Don is still alive and where, that information goes to whoever is paying him. We need to know who that is. How? Ferrara will come, Gennaro said. Official visit, welfare check. He'll want to see you, establish your status. He met her eyes. I need you to be a certain kind of calm when he does. She thought of her mother, who had carried a secret for 30 years and been calm every day of it. I can do that, she said. He'll also be looking for information he can take back. He'll ask questions. The way he phrases the questions will tell us things. He paused. Marco wants to speak with you before Ferrara arrives. Of course he does, she said. She stood. When? Now. She followed Gennaro down the corridor, through the house she had learned in 11 days, the third step from the bottom that creaked, the way the light shifted through the west window at mid-morning, the arrangement of rooms that made sense once you understood that the house had been designed to let the person at its centre see and not be seen. She understood this now. She was beginning to understand all of it. Marco was sitting at his desk, which meant he had climbed the stairs again, and she opened her mouth, and he said, I know, before she could speak. You can't keep... I know, Elena. The tone, the different tone, the one that wasn't a command. She closed her mouth. He had a map on the desk, street map, Boston, with markings she couldn't interpret from the doorway. Sit down. She sat. Ferrara will ask if you're being held against your will, he said. And what do I say? Whatever you want, he said, and looked at her steadily. I mean that. If you tell him you want to leave, I will arrange it. Safe. Someone I still trust will take you. He held her gaze. I won't keep you here against your will. I should have told you that sooner. She absorbed this. She thought about the evening in the garden, the amber light, the glass of wine at midnight, Salvatore's 30%. And if I stay? She said. Something happened in his eyes, very controlled, very present. Then I would like your help, he said. Help with what? Finding the person in this house, he said, who wants me dead. Captain Aldo Ferrara arrived at 3 in the afternoon in a city-issue sedan and the careful non-expression of a man who has learned over 20 years of navigating 2 worlds exactly how much to show. He was 55, lean, with grey at his temples and a quality of watchfulness that Elena recognized as professional, the same watchfulness she carried, the occupational inheritance of people who have learned that what they don't notice can kill their patients, or in his case, their stories. He had been in law enforcement for 27 years, Gennaro had told her. Decorated, clean record, 2 paychecks. Elena met him in the sitting room alone. This had been Marco's instruction. Well, his clear preference communicated without being an instruction, and she had agreed because the logic of it was sound. A man with 2 paychecks would be more informative when not being watched by the man who paid one of them. Ferrara came in and looked at her with eyes that were doing several things at once. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "I'm glad you're all right." He said it the way people say things they need to have said. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you for coming." We received a concern. He was already watching the room, his eyes moving over it with the systematic sweep of a professional. "That you were being held here against your will." "That's not accurate." She kept her voice pleasant and level. "I'm here voluntarily. I had a patient with a complex injury who required extended monitoring. I've been in contact with my hospital. You can verify that." She paused just long enough. "Who expressed the concern?" Something moved through his face, quickly, almost invisibly. "Anonymous tip," he said. "We take these things seriously." "Of course." She folded her hands in her lap. She was watching his hands, his eyes, the micro movements that bodies make when they're working. "Is there anything else I can help you with, Captain?" "The patient," he said. "I'll need to—" "He's resting. He had a procedure recently. Visitors are limited." She held his gaze. "You understand. Medical necessity." Ferrara looked at her for a moment. Then he looked around the room again, at the window, the furniture, the door. He was looking for something. She didn't know what. She let him look. "You're free to leave at any time," he said. "Of course." "No one is preventing you." "No one," she said. "I'm a doctor doing my job, Captain. That's all." He nodded slowly. He believed her about 40%, she estimated. The other 60% would report what it had seen and heard to whoever was paying for the information. And that was the point. He said a few more things, pleasantries, procedural observations, and she answered them and walked him to the door and watched the city-issue sedan pull back through the iron gate. And then she went upstairs. Marco was listening to everything she had known. Not in the room, that would have been too visible, but somewhere close. Audio, she assumed, though she didn't know where the device was and hadn't looked. She went to his study and sat down. "What did you hear?" she said. "What I needed to." He was at the window again. He was looking for the secondary door, the one off the pantry. He glanced at it twice. "The one you can't see from the drive," she said. "If he knows where it is, then whoever told him has been inside this house." He turned. "Not just someone with access to my schedule, someone who has been inside these rooms." She thought of the people she had catalogued in 11 days, Rosa, Gennaro, Salvatore, the guards, 4 that she could name, 2 others. 2 young men who ran errands and drove cars and appeared at meals without being introduced. "How many people know about the pantry door?" she asked. "Anyone who's been here more than once." He moved away from the window, sat across from her. He was moving better now. The wound was healing. The antibiotics had done their work. She had done her work. And the sight of him, upright and present and at full cognitive capacity, was, she was discovering, different from the sight of him weakened on the sofa. The full version of Marco Conti was a different proposition. "Give me the names," she said. He looked at her. "Elena, I'm a doctor. I do diagnoses. Give me the names and tell me what you know about each one, and I'll tell you what I think." She held his eyes. "I'm not in your world. I'll see things you're too close to see." A long pause. Then he reached into the desk drawer and produced a sheet of paper, a list, handwritten, tight, clear script, and laid it on the desk between them. She read. They worked for 3 hours. It was not like anything she had imagined working with him would be. Systematic, almost impersonal, the two of them moving through each name with a shared efficiency that had developed, apparently, in 11 days of vitals and amber light and late evenings and things not said. She read the names and asked questions, and he answered them without filtering, or with less filtering than he usually applied. And she listened not just to the information, but to the quality of his silences, to what he held slightly longer before answering, to what he gave too easily. She did not tell him what she was doing. She let him think she was analysing the names. She was also analysing him. She had done this with patients for 9 years. It had a specific discipline. You listened to what they said, and you listened to what they left out, and you listened to the body's insistence on its own truth when the mind was trying to tell a different story. Patients lied about pain levels, about medications taken, about falls they'd had that they were embarrassed about. They lied out of fear and out of pride and out of a wish for a different story. The body always kept the true record. Marco was not in pain. Marco was not afraid. But there was something. A name on the list, a particular pause when she reached it, a quality of restraint that she read as involuntary. The name was Cesare. "Who is Cesare?" she asked, the second time she circled back to it. "My cousin." He said it in the flat voice. "He's been with the family since we were children. He runs the operations in the North End." "He's not here?" She had not met anyone named Cesare. "He's not been here this week." A pause. "He's been in New York, on business." "Since when?" A longer pause. "Since 3 days before the shooting." Silence. "Marco," she said. He stood up. He went to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she waited. And outside the February light was failing, the early dark of New England winter coming down like a curtain. "He's family," he said, without turning. "Yes," she said. "His father and my father—" He stopped. "He grew up in this house." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why it's him." Another silence. He was very still. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm not sure of anything, but you paused twice when I said his name. You told me he was in New York before I asked where he was. You knew exactly how many days before the shooting he left." She kept her voice gentle, the way she kept it gentle when she told people things they weren't ready to hear. "You've known for a while." He turned around. His face was doing its careful nothing, but there was something underneath, something that was not nothing at all, something that was a kind of grief that had no good place to put itself. "I suspected," he said. "I didn't have proof." "You're still not sure it's proof, but it's direction." He looked at her. She looked at him. The failing winter light was behind him, and she realized, looking at the actual man, not the Don, not the patient, not the dangerous proposition of her situation. The actual man who had grown up with a cousin who had betrayed him, and who had known it at some level before he'd admitted it to himself. "What do I do with this?" he said. And he said it the way people say things they have never said aloud, stripped of pretense, stripped of management, the raw question underneath. "You gather proof," she said, "and then you decide what to do with it. That part," she paused, "that part isn't mine." He looked at her for a moment more. Then he nodded once, the decision snapping back into place, the Don returning to the surface of the man. "Stay in the house tonight," he said. "Both doors." I usually do, she said. And then, because she needed to say something that was just between them, Marco, I'm sorry. He looked at her, startled, the word having surprised him. He had not expected it. She watched him absorb it. Don't be, he said. You told me the truth. He paused. That's rare. She gathered her notes and her pen and left him at the window with the dark coming down outside. And in the corridor she stopped and put her back against the wall and breathed, slowly, until her pulse settled. She had spent 11 days in a stranger's house, and she had diagnosed a traitor and started to fall in love with the man the traitor had tried to kill. And she was her mother's daughter, and she did not know yet what any of it meant. The proof came from where proofs often come, from an accountant. Gennaro produced him on day 13, a small man named Bruno Accetta, who had, it turned out, been quietly keeping 2 sets of numbers for the Conti family's legitimate operations, one set for Marco and one that went elsewhere. The elsewhere had been, until 6 months ago, an untraceable digital transfer account. Bruno had made a mistake, a human one, a single shared routing number used twice, and Gennaro's people had followed the thread. The thread led to a shell company in Delaware. The shell company in Delaware had a registered agent who was a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan. The lawyer's other clients included, among others, a Cesare Conti. Gennaro showed Marco the paperwork in the study on the morning of the 13th day, and Elena was there. She had been there for breakfast, a routine now, one of the countless small routines that had assembled themselves without being discussed. And she watched Marco read the documents and felt from across the room the particular quality of the silence that surrounded him while he did. When he finished, he set the papers on the desk. He was quiet for so long that even Gennaro, who was himself a veteran of silences, shifted slightly. How much? Marco asked. Enough to fund the intelligence Volkov needed. Gennaro's voice was flat. The routes, the schedule, the detail about the secondary door on the northwest side. A pause. 3 payments over 4 months. Marco nodded. He looked out the window. February was giving up. There was something different in the light this week, something less absolute, and the frost was thinner on the garden gravel. Elena watched his profile, the jaw, the scar, the quality of contained force that was always present, but that today had a different character. Where is he? Marco said. New York. Still. Keep him there. Marco turned from the window. He looked at Gennaro, and something passed between them that Elena was not meant to see and did not look away from. A decision. The kind of decision that this world made, in this register, with this kind of efficiency. I want Ferrara's second paycheck traced first. I want the Volkov connection confirmed before I move. A pause. And then we move. Marco, Gennaro hesitated. The first time she had seen him hesitate in 2 weeks. I know who he is. Flat. Absolute. Do it. Gennaro left. Marco stood at his desk and looked at the paperwork for a moment, and Elena stayed in her chair and did not pretend she hadn't heard. You don't have to, she started. Stay, he said, without turning. Please. The word was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. She stayed. He stood at the window for a long time, and she sat in the chair, and the house breathed around them, and outside the February light continued its slow surrender. She did not speak. He did not ask her to. This was, she had come to understand, one of the things she gave him that no one else in this house could. The ability to be still and uncertain without it being witnessed, because she was outside the hierarchy, outside the weight of what his stillness meant to the people beneath him. With her, he could simply be a man standing at a window, not knowing what to feel. When he turned around, his face was closed again, the window, the careful management. But he looked at her, and it was a particular kind of looking, the kind that knows it is seen. He was there, Marco said, the night of my father's funeral. He was 14. He stood next to me. He paused. He told me, he said, "I will never let anything happen to you." He said it the way children say things. She thought of her mother in the hospital room. The things that get said when someone is leaving or has just left, the promises that outlive the people who make them. People change, she said. It doesn't unmake who they were. In this world, he said, it has to. She understood. She didn't agree and she didn't disagree. She sat with the truth of it, which was that in his world, the unmakeable thing had to be made, because this world ran on consequence, and without consequence the whole architecture collapsed. "What can I do?" she said. He looked at her, that recalibration, the one she had come to find beautiful in a way she hadn't named yet to herself. "You're already doing it," he said. Salvatore knocked on her door that evening with a bottle of Barolo and an expression that was unusual for him, serious. She let him in. He sat in the armchair by the window and poured without asking, and she took the glass because refusing it would have been a different kind of conversation than the one he was there for. "He found out about Cesare," he said. "Yes." Salvatore looked at his glass. "I knew," he said, "or I suspected. I've been trying to—" He stopped. "I didn't know how to tell Marco. I didn't know how to—" He stopped again. His face was doing things she didn't often see on his face. Difficulty. Genuine difficulty. "I found a discrepancy in the accounts 6 months ago, in Rome. I mentioned it to Cesare, and he explained it. And the explanation was plausible, but—" He set down his glass. "I should have told Marco." "You were protecting him," she said, "from having to know." "I was being a coward," he said. "In this family, that sometimes looks the same." She drank. The Barolo was very good, the way everything in this house was very good, the accumulated wealth of 3 generations finding its expression in daily life. "Have you told him?" "Not yet." He looked at her. "I will. But first I needed—" He made a gesture she couldn't quite interpret. "I needed to say it to someone else first. Practice the shape of it." "Confession," she said. "My brother's not the only one who learned that from the church," he said, with a small smile that didn't have much warmth in it. He picked up his glass again. "You're good at this, you know, listening. It's part of the job." "It's more than the job." He looked at her steadily. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "Do you know what you're doing here?" "Not medically. The rest." She thought about the garden in the dark, the amber light, 30%. "I know what's happening," she said carefully. "I don't know what to do about it." "That's honest," he nodded. "Marco doesn't trust easily. When he does—" He paused. "He's different. He was different once, fully. He fell in love once, when he was very young, before our father died and the whole weight of it fell on him. It was—" He tilted the glass. "It ended badly. She couldn't live in this world. She chose not to. He said it without judgment, just the clean fact of it. He closed after that, more than from anything else. He told me about the window, she said. Salvatore looked at her, surprised. He told you? Not explicitly, but I understood it. He was quiet for a moment. He talks to you, he said, and it was clear that this was not a small thing, the surprise of it. He actually talks to you. She thought of the windows, the study, the garden, the particular quality of the things they said and the things they didn't say, and the way both kinds of communication had their own weight. A little, she said. Salvatore looked at her with eyes that were his brother's eyes, pointed at a different register. And what she saw in them was something she recognized as both relief and something more complicated than relief. Good, he said finally. I think... He stopped. I think that's good. They finished the wine in silence that was, like all the best silences in that house, not entirely comfortable, but completely honest. Marco came to her door at 11. She was not asleep. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, in the lamplight, with her medical notebook. She had been recording the case history, the clinical narrative, something to do with her hands during the impossible hours. And when she heard the knock, she knew it was him, because she had learned the specific weight of his step. She opened the door. He was in dark clothing, no jacket, and he looked at her with an expression that had been stripped down, not to nothing, not the careful nothing, stripped to something. Cesare's flying in tomorrow, he said. Gennaro told him to? No, he decided on his own. He called. He said he wanted to see me. A pause. Which means he knows I know, or he suspects that I suspect. And he's either going to try to explain, or he's come to finish what he started, she said. Yes. She held his gaze. Then tomorrow is dangerous. Yes. She stepped back from the door. He came in, and she did not think about what it meant that she let him in without hesitation, that it felt, in this impossible house, during this impossible fortnight, entirely right. He stood in the centre of her blue room and looked around it, at the white curtains, the flowers that Rosa kept replacing, the Dante on the nightstand, the medical notebook open on the bed, and she watched him take in the evidence of her 14 days there, the shape of her life pressed into this temporary space. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. After tomorrow, he looked at her. Whatever happens, and it will be handled, I'm not asking you to. He stopped, started again. Afterward. I don't want you to leave without telling me. She looked at him. Without telling me, he repeated. And the careful nothing was gone, entirely, and what was left was what had been underneath it for 14 days. Okay, she said. That's all, he said. That's what I needed. He left, and she sat down on the edge of the bed, and the house breathed around her, and she put her hand flat on the medical notebook and felt the texture of everything she had not yet written down. Cesare Conti arrived at noon. He arrived as he always arrived, apparently. Gennaro told her this with the practiced casualness of someone providing context rather than commentary. In the same black car he'd driven for 10 years, with the same 2 men who had been with him that long, with the easy proprietary belonging of someone who is coming home. Elena watched from the library window. He was 46, heavy-set in the way of men who had been athletic in their youth and had moved into a different kind of solidity. He had the Conti jaw. It was a family feature, she had noticed, the same strong line recurring across the portrait gallery. But his face had a smoothness to it that Marco's didn't, a quality of surfaces. He looked up at the house as he climbed from the car, and it was that look that told her. He was calculating. Even in the gesture of looking at his childhood home, there was calculation. She went back to the library. She was not part of what was about to happen. She had been told this, in Marco's way of telling things, not instructions, but the clear expectation of someone who has thought through every position in the room and knows where each person is safest. She read Dante and did not read Dante, and listened to the house. The confrontation happened in the dining room. She learned this afterward from Salvatore, who had been present, had insisted on being present, had apparently argued with Marco about it and lost, or won, depending on how you read the outcome. He told her, sitting in the kitchen at 3 p.m, both of them with coffee they weren't drinking. Marco had let Cesare arrive and settle, had offered him wine, which Cesare had accepted, had asked after New York, after business, with the courtesy that this world required and that served also as a form of pressure. The longer the courtesy was maintained, the clearer the message that what was coming was chosen, not reactive. Then he had laid the documents on the table. Cesare had looked at them. There was a silence. Then he had done something unexpected. He had not denied it. He cried, Salvatore said. He said it without expression, not because he didn't feel it, but because feeling it out loud wasn't possible yet. He looked at the papers and he cried. He said he owed money, old money, to people he couldn't, that they had him, that he'd been paying them back for 3 years and they kept asking for more, and eventually they asked for something he couldn't. He stopped. He said he never told them to kill you. He said he gave them information, routes, schedules. He said he thought they would intimidate, that Marco would back down from the territory dispute, and that would be the end of it. Elena held her coffee cup. He was lying, she said, about what he thought would happen. Salvatore looked at her. I know, he said. Marco knew. A pause. But he also... He stopped again. He also remembered the funeral, the 14-year-old. He told me later. He said... His voice had changed. He said, I could see both of them, at the same time, the boy and the man. He drank his cold coffee. That's the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that doesn't erase what came before. What happened? She asked. He's being held, secured. Salvatore used the words that this world used for the things it did not name openly. Marco was very controlled. He gestured. He wasn't violent. He told Cesare that the account of what he'd done would be settled. But not today. Today he wanted answers. He looked out the kitchen window. He asked who was next, who else in the network Volkov had bought. He paused. Cesare gave him 3 names. 3, he nodded, which is why the next few days are going to be, he made a gesture, careful. She thought of Marco in the study the night before, the expression stripped down, the thing that had been underneath the careful nothing. I don't want you to leave without telling me. Is Marco all right? She said. Salvatore looked at her, and it was the look he'd had on the stairs when she asked, and the answer was in it before he spoke. "He will be," he said. "He's managing. He's doing what he does. But tonight," he paused, "tonight I think he should not be alone." She went to him at 7. The house had a different quality in the evening after what had happened. A held breath quality. A stillness that was not peace, but was the after-image of decisive action. The silence following a door slammed in a large room. The guards moved differently. Gennaro was on the phone in his office, door closed. Rosa moved through the kitchen with efficient quiet, not her usual commentary. The whole apparatus of the estate had adjusted its register. She knocked on the study door. "Come in." He was at his desk, but not working. He was sitting back in his chair with a glass of something in his hand, whiskey, amber in the lamplight, and he was looking at the wall across from him, where there was nothing particular to look at. He looked at her when she came in, and the expression on his face was very quiet. She sat in her chair. "Salvatore told you," he said. "Yes." "How much?" "Enough." She looked at him. "How are you?" He considered this as if it were a genuine question, which from her it always was. He turned the whiskey glass. "Tired," he said. "I've been—" He stopped. "I've been knowing it and not knowing it for a long time, both at once. There's a kind of effort to that." A pause. "It's finished now." "Knowing and not knowing," she said. "That does take effort." She thought of her mother's box in the bottom of the closet, the photograph face down. 30 years. "My mother carried something like that for most of her life." He looked at her. "Your father?" "Not just him. The whole weight of the life she'd left, knowing what it was and having to not know it every day in order to function." She paused. She was very tired at the end. "I used to think it was the illness. I think now it was mostly the effort." "She told you everything," he said, "before she died. She told me what she could." Elena looked at the wall that Marco had been looking at, the nothing on it, the plain, lamp-lit plaster. "I think she wanted to put it down, to give it to someone else to carry." A pause. "I wasn't ready, but she was." Silence. Not the chessboard silence, the other kind. "My father told me everything the night before he died," Marco said. He said it simply, without theatre, which meant it was important. "I was 22. He had been sick. He knew it was close. He sat me down, and he told me the full inventory." He looked at his whiskey. "I wasn't ready either." "Were you angry?" "Not at him." A pause. "At the situation, at the architecture of it, that I was always going to be here, regardless." He looked up at her. "I chose to be here, eventually. I want to be clear about that. I chose." "I know," she said. "You told me. Inheritance and choice." "Yes." He set down the glass. He looked at her steadily, and the thing underneath the careful nothing was very present. "Elena," he said. "I know," she said again, quietly, not stopping him, just knowing it already, having known it, having been in the amber light and the garden and the midnight wine with it, having carried it the way her mother carried things. "I can't ask you to—" He stopped, started again. "This world doesn't—" "I know what this world is," she said. "I grew up knowing what this world is, even not knowing all of it. My mother made sure. She met his eyes. That's not what I'm afraid of. What are you afraid of? He said, and he asked it with the directness of someone who has decided to stop managing, to ask the actual question. She thought about it. The honest answer. That I'll choose something I can't unchoose, she said, and that the choosing will be right and terrible at the same time, the way all the real choices are. He held her gaze. Something moved through his face. Not the shadow of a smile, not the 30%, the real thing. The thing that had been in the portrait of the younger man who hadn't yet become the Don. Yes, he said, that's it exactly. She got up from her chair and crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk, and he looked up at her from the chair, and neither of them said anything, and the house breathed around them, and outside February was becoming March without asking anyone's permission. He took her hand, just that. He turned it over in both of his and looked at it, the surgeon's hands, the doctor's hands, and then he looked up at her. Stay, he said. Tell me what that means, she said, in this world, what staying means. It means, he paused, it means a life I can't make safe, that I'll try to make safe and will fail sometimes. It means who I am, which is not, I know who you are, she said. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. I know who you are. He was quiet. He was doing the thing where he looked at her with all of it present, the 30% and the rest of it, the whole calculation and what lay underneath the calculation. Then you know that I'm... He stopped. Complicated, she said. Dangerous, he said. Yes, she said, I know. She turned her hand so that it was holding his. So am I. The meeting with Volkov came on the 18th day. It was not a meeting Marco had requested. Volkov had sent word, through Gennaro's contact, through the careful diplomatic channels that this world maintained even in conflict, that he wished to speak. The attempt on Marco's life had been, the message said, a misunderstanding. There were mutual interests to discuss. Elena stood in the study with Marco and Gennaro and Salvatore while they read the message and watched all 3 of them decide what to think. He's scared, Salvatore said. 3 of his people in Boston were picked up this week. Ferrara's gone quiet. He's under review by Internal Affairs. Somebody made an anonymous call. Volkov is overextended, and he knows it. He wants to negotiate, Gennaro said. It was not a judgment, just a reading. He wants to see if I'm alive, Marco said. Flat, accurate. He hasn't confirmed it. Cesare doesn't know, or knew, past tense, exactly what happened. Volkov needs to see me across a table. So let him, Elena said. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. She was used to this now, the slightly recalibrated attention when she spoke in these conversations, the adjustment that acknowledged she was in this room, had earned being in this room. Let him see that you're alive and functional, she said. And then you'll know more than you knew about what he wants. She's right, Salvatore said. The meeting is information. Marco looked at her for a moment. You'll stay here, he said, in the house. Rosa and 2 men. I know, she said. I mean it, Elena. I know you mean it. She held his eyes. Go. Come back. He looked at her. Something in his face that had no name. Then he turned to Gennaro and said, Set the meeting. The meeting was at a restaurant in the North End. Elena knew this because Salvatore told her before he left with Marco. Marco had tried to prevent Salvatore from going, had argued about it, had been overruled in the quiet way that Salvatore overruled his brother, with complete apparent agreement that collapsed entirely at the moment of action. The house was strange with them gone. Not quiet. Rosa moved through it with her usual purpose, and the two remaining guards were present, and the physical space was the same, but different in the way that rooms are different when the person who organizes them is absent. Elena tried to read. She tried to check her notes. She made tea and drank it, standing at the kitchen window, looking at the garden, which was showing the first impossible suggestion of green at the base of the rose wall. March doing what March does, the incremental return. At 7:43, her phone rang. This was surprising. Her phone, returned to her a week ago after Marco had decided the situation was different enough from what it had been to justify it, did not often ring. She had explained her extended absence to the hospital, had answered texts from 2 colleagues, had called no one because there was no one to call. Her mother was gone. She had kept herself deliberately small and contained, moving from residency to practice to this small apartment in the South End, accumulating expertise and avoiding the accumulation of anything that could be taken. The number was unfamiliar. She answered. "Elena?" The voice was accented, not Italian, something from further east, something cold and precise. "You don't know me." She kept her voice very steady. "Who is this?" "A man who knew your mother." A pause. "A man who has been looking for something he lost a long time ago." The cold moved through her. She looked around the kitchen. Rosa was in the other room. She could hear the television. She walked to the window. "Say your name," she said. "You know my name," the voice said. "I think you've known it for some time. Your mother was a woman who believed in preparation." "Sorokin," she said. "Yes." A pause. "Elena, I need you to listen carefully. The men your patient is meeting tonight, Volkov is not alone. He has a second team. Marco Conti will not leave that restaurant." She felt something cold and specific lock into place inside her. "You're warning me." "I'm warning you." His voice was even. "Because you are my daughter, and because I have been building towards something for a long time that requires Marco Conti to be alive." A pause. "I need you to call Gennaro Ricci. Now. Tell him about the second team. Tell him the team will be entering from the Via Bari side, 4 men. They have 12 minutes. Why should I believe you? Because I could have told this to Volkov 6 months ago, and I didn't." His voice was very quiet. "Because your mother left me, and she was right to leave me, and the one thing she gave me that I never deserved was the knowledge that you existed. I've been watching you for 2 years, Elena. You are her exactness and my ambition. And I know what you've been doing in that house." A pause. "I know who you're becoming for that man, and I am not going to let him die because a Russian idiot is afraid of him." She was already moving, crossing the kitchen toward the corridor. "Via Bari," she said. 4 men, 12 minutes. 11 now, he said. She hung up and called Gennaro. She didn't know in the following 40 minutes which direction time moved. She sat in the kitchen with Rosa, who had been told nothing but understood everything. The quality of Elena's stillness, the phone in her white-knuckled hand, the tea going cold for the second time. and she did not move. Her phone rang at 8:31. "We're coming back," Gennaro said. His voice was clipped. "Everyone is all right." She put the phone down on the table, and Rosa, who had been shelling dried beans with the systematic calm of a woman who has done this before in these circumstances, reached across and put her hand over Elena's. "They're all right," Elena said. "Yes," Rosa said. "They always have been." And then a slight pause. "Well, mostly." Marco walked in at 9. He walked in the way he always walked, contained, the force in him moving under the surface of him, but there was something different tonight. He came through the kitchen door, and he looked at her. And she stood up, and he crossed the room, and he stopped when he was close enough that she could see the detail of his face in the kitchen light. "You called Gennaro," he said. "Yes." "How did you know?" She looked at him. She thought of the cold voice on the phone, the Eastern accent, the words he had said. "You are her exactness and my ambition." She thought of the 30 years her mother had carried a box at the bottom of a closet. "Someone called me," she said. "Someone who knew what was being planned." "Who?" She held his eyes. This was the moment, the real choice, the one that is both right and terrible. "My father," she said. The silence that followed was very particular. She watched Marco absorb it, absorb the whole shape of it, the coincidence that had teeth, the impossibility that was apparently the exact shape of the world. "Sorokin," he said. "He warned me. He said he needed you alive." She paused. "He said other things, personal things." She held Marco's gaze. "I don't know what he is to you strategically. I don't know what this means for whatever was going to happen with Volkov. I'm telling you because I told you I would tell you things." "You told me I could trust you," he said. "Yes." He looked at her, the chessboard and underneath the chessboard. "Sorokin has been—" He was working through it, the fast, structured thinking, the architecture of what it meant. If Sorokin is playing his own hand, if he's been positioning himself outside the Volkov network deliberately— "He built the information network," Elena said. "He sold Cesare's intelligence to Volkov, but he made sure certain information didn't reach Volkov, the things that would have actually finished you." She paused. "He's been keeping you in play." "As a counterweight," Marco said quietly, "to Volkov." "He wants Volkov stopped," she said. "He told me that's what he's been building toward. He needs someone to stop Volkov who isn't him, because if he does it himself, he becomes the power in the vacuum," Marco said, "which he doesn't want to be, not in Boston." He looked at her. "Elena." "I know," she said. "He's your father." "He's a stranger," she said, "who happens to be my father." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you everything I know. What you do with it is your decision." He looked at her for a long time. Something was happening in his face. Multiple things. The layers of it, the way his face worked in this register. The Don and the man and the thing that was neither one. He reached out and put his hand against her face. Just that. His hand, warm, against her face, in the kitchen light, with Rosa very carefully occupied with something near the stove. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" she said. "I believe you," he said, "and we'll figure out the rest." She put her hand over his, the full choosing, right and terrible and entirely real. "Yes," she said, "we will." Spring came to the estate the way spring comes to New England, not all at once, not gently, but in arguments. A warm day, followed by snow, followed by sun, followed by rain, the weather negotiating with itself in full view of anyone watching. The roses on the south wall made their incremental case through all of it, putting out shoots that looked improbable against the late frost, insisting on themselves. Elena was there to see it. She stayed, not because she was held, because she chose it. She had called Mass General in March and explained what she could, and then had spoken to the Chief of Emergency Medicine, a woman she trusted, and had said she needed a leave of absence for personal reasons, and she would explain when she could. It was not a conversation she had enjoyed, it was a necessary one. She stayed because Marco asked her, and because she would have stayed anyway, having arrived at this truth with the characteristic lateness with which she arrived at personal truths, which is to say, she had known it for 3 weeks before she said it, even to herself. The work of March was diplomatic. Marco worked in that peculiar register of this world, meetings she was not part of, phone calls in Italian and twice in Russian, Gennaro's comings and goings with the careful non-expression of someone carrying weight. Salvatore present now and fully, his Roman life suspended while the family oriented itself. The 3 Conti names Cesare had given were handled. Ferrara was handled, removed from the equation without violence, which had required, Gennaro told her, considerable creativity. The Boston PD's Internal Affairs Unit apparently needed only minor encouragement to do what internal affairs units do. Volkov was the larger question. The meeting in the North End had not been the confrontation that Volkov had planned. The second team had been intercepted efficiently, and Volkov had sat across a table from a very alive Marco Conti and understood in that particular silence that the landscape had changed in ways he hadn't calculated. He was not stupid. He had retreated. Whether the retreat held would depend on time and on what Alexei Sorokin was building. Elena had not spoken to her father again. She had thought about calling the number, had held her phone with his number on the screen twice, 3 times, and had put it down. She needed to sit with what she knew about him before she added more. She needed to decide in her own time what she wanted from that relationship, which was not a word she'd ever expected to use in this context. Marco did not press her about it. This was one of the things she was learning about him, the spaces he left. They were deliberate, and they were gifts. On a Sunday in late March, she found him in the garden. She had looked for him in the study, then in the dining room, then had come through the kitchen door into the garden, and there he was, in the rose bed, against the south wall, kneeling in the earth in dark trousers with his coat off, in shirt sleeves in the tentative warmth, doing something careful and precise with a pair of pruning shears. He looked up when he heard her. He did not look embarrassed, which she appreciated. He looked like himself, the full version, the one she had been watching assemble itself over 6 weeks, each piece of careful management released by degrees until the man underneath was present in larger and larger proportion. "You should be resting," she said, though his wound was healed and they both knew it. "My doctor released me last week," he said. "Your doctor would like you to take it easy." My doctor, he said, has strong opinions for someone who is not technically still my doctor. She came and crouched beside the rose bed and looked at what he was doing, the careful trimming of dead wood, the attention to each cane, the deliberate judgment about what to keep and what to cut. He worked with the same quality of attention he applied to everything, completely. My mother loved roses, she said. What kind? I don't know. The pink ones, the ones that smell like things. She looked at the bare canes. These are yellow? Some of them. The climbers on the east side are white. There's a red one in the centre bed that my father planted when Salvatore was born. He looked at the cane he was holding. They need more attention in March than any other month. Everything they're going to be this year is deciding itself right now. She looked at his hands on the shears. Capable hands, the same quality as her hands, she thought, the same capacity for precision and damage, though differently trained. She thought about Salvatore's 30%. She thought about everything she had not said in 6 weeks and was still not saying. Marco, she said. Yes. I want to tell you something. He looked at her. He set down the shears. I came here as a hostage, she said, or nearly one. I came because a car was outside and a man had been shot and I could not go. She held his gaze. And I stayed because you asked me to stay, but I also stayed because... She paused, working out the sentence, the exact sentence. Because the thing that was happening between us was the first thing in a long time that felt like it was mine, that I chose, not the situation, not this world, not the impossible coincidences, not my father. She looked at him steadily. You. I chose you. He was very still. The quality of his stillness was different from all its other incarnations. This was not management, not calculation. This was the stillness of someone receiving something they weren't prepared for, that they had wanted without believing they would have it. He reached out and took her hand from her knee and held it in both of his, the way he had in the study, and looked at it, and then looked up at her. Elena, he said. Don't make a speech, she said. I'm not good with speeches. Something moved across his face, the real thing, the thing that wasn't the shadow of a smile. I wasn't going to make a speech, he said. I was going to say that I love you. She looked at him. He looked at her. The rose bed between them, the March sun tentative overhead, the house behind them with its 3 generations of complicated history in its walls. Okay, she said. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Okay? That's what you said to me, she said, in the kitchen. After everything, you said, okay. And it was sufficient, he said, with the dryness that she had come to love, that particular dry register that meant he was entirely present. It was perfect, she said. Some things are. She turned her hand so it was holding his, and looked at the rose wall, the improbable shoots insisting on themselves against the late March cold, and felt the full weight of the thing she had chosen, the difficulty and the danger and the complication, the world she was now inside without reservation, and the man who had built a wall around his brother's ordinary life, and kept roses in memory of his mother, and had said, I don't want you to leave without telling me, in a voice stripped of everything but what it meant. Tell me about Volkov, she said, where things stand. Now. I want to understand, all of it. She looked at him. I need to know what I'm in. He considered this, the chessboard, the architecture, the layers. Then he nodded. All right, he said. I'll tell you everything. He did tell her everything. Not that afternoon in the rosebed. They came inside when the cold won the argument with the sun, and Rosa made coffee and found reasons to be in the other room, and they sat in the study, in the amber light that had become their room, really, the room where everything important between them had happened. He told her the full picture, Volkov's network, Sorokin's positioning, the 3 remaining vulnerabilities in the Boston operation, the tentative alignment with 2 other families that was being negotiated through back channels. She listened and asked questions. Good questions, the questions of someone who was listening not just to the information, but to the structure underneath it, the political logic, the human motivations. He noticed this and said nothing about it, but the noticing was visible to her. When he finished, there was a silence. Sorokin needs you, she said. He needs you as the counterweight. If Volkov is brought down through your operations, Sorokin gets the network without the exposure. She paused. He's using you. Yes, he said. I know. And I'm using him back. He held her gaze. Information has been moving in both directions for 3 months. I knew about the second team before you called me. I was already moving the table. A pause. What I didn't know was that he would call you, that he would choose that. He looked at her steadily. That tells me something. That he cares, she said, about me. That he cares about you, which means... He paused. It's leverage. I'm sorry, I know it's honest, she said. You're being honest with me. She thought about this. He's my father, and you might use the fact that he cares about me as leverage against him. Possibly. He held her gaze without flinching. I told you I'd tell you everything. She looked at him. The man she had chosen, in his full complexity, his world and its logic, and the specific moral register it operated in, which was not her moral register, and she was not pretending it was. She had not chosen naively, she had chosen with her eyes open, which was the only way she knew how to choose. Then I want a condition, she said. Name it. If it ever comes to using my relationship with Sorokin, if it ever becomes a factor in something you're planning, you tell me first. You don't move without telling me first. He looked at her. He was thinking. She waited. Yes, he said. That's reasonable. It's not just reasonable, she said. It's the line. Yes, he said again. I understand. And she believed him, which was either wisdom or the specific foolishness of women who choose complicated men, and she had decided she was not going to be afraid of the distinction. Salvatore left for Rome in April. He left the way he arrived, with too much energy for early morning, with coffee Rosa pressed on him at the door, with his hands on his brother's shoulders, and something in his expression that was the real smile, the slightly sad one, but less sad than it had been in February. Elena stood in the drive in the April air, and Salvatore took her hands in his and looked at her with the dark eyes that were Marco's eyes in the other register. You stayed, he said. I stayed, she agreed. Good, he squeezed her hands. He'll try to make it difficult sometimes. He's built for difficulty. Don't let him. I'm a doctor, she said. Difficult patients are my specialty. He laughed. actually laughed, the full version warm in the morning air. I knew I liked you. He stepped back. He looked at Marco. Something passed between the brothers. The specific gravity of it, the weight of what they were to each other. And Marco nodded once, and Salvatore nodded and got in the car. They watched it go through the iron gate. Marco stood beside her, and the April air smelled of the things that April air smells of, earth and cold water and something green, and the roses on the south wall were doing what they'd decided in March, which was to become what they were going to be. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked at her. "I haven't been afraid of anything in a long time," he said. "I stopped being afraid when I became the Don. You learn to not feel it." He paused. "I'm afraid now." "Of what?" "Of failing you," he said. "Of the world I'm in, reaching something it shouldn't reach." His jaw was tight. "I can control a lot of things. Not everything." "I know," she said. "I'm afraid too." "Of what?" he said. She thought about it. The honest answer, the full one. "Of how much I want this," she said. "How much I want you. I'm not accustomed to wanting things this much." She held his eyes. "It feels dangerous." "It is dangerous," he said. "Yes." She looked at the rose wall. "But so is everything worth having." She looked back at him. "My mother chose safety. She left and she was safe, and she was alone for 30 years with a box at the bottom of a closet." She paused. "I'm not criticizing her. She had her reasons. She gave me a life." She met his eyes. "But I'm not going to do what she did. I'm going to choose differently." He looked at her with everything present, the Don and the man and the something that was neither one, the thing that had been growing in this house through February and March and into the first warmth of April, the thing that had no name more precise than what it was. He put his arm around her, there in the drive in the morning air, and she leaned into him, the solidity of him, the architectural quality of him, and they stood in front of the house that had been named for a peace it had never quite contained, and watched the gate close after the car that carried his brother. And the sun came through the bare trees at the estate's edge and fell across the gravel and across the rose wall where the climbing roses were opening. Father Benedetto came for confession on the last Friday of April. He was 70, small, with the hands of someone who had spent his life in service and the eyes of someone who had spent it in knowledge. He came every month, Rosa told her. He had come every month since the grandfather's time. He knew everything and said nothing, and this was, in the economy of this world, worth more than almost anything. He sat with Elena in the library for 20 minutes while Marco was in the study. She hadn't asked for this. Father Benedetto had simply appeared in the doorway of the library and looked at her and said, "May I sit with you?" And she had said yes. "You're staying," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "This world." He paused. He looked at the books on the shelves, the old spines, the Italian titles. "It's not evil," he said. "Not simply. It is complicated, the way humans are complicated. The grandfather was a cruel man in some ways and a generous man in others. The father was—" a pause. "Divided. Marco is the best of them." He looked at her. "That is not a simple statement." In this family, being the best of them is still complicated, she said. Yes, he looked at his hands. But I think you know that. I think you chose it knowing. He looked up at her. Your mother was a devout woman? She thought of the rosary. Yes. And yet she kept a secret for 30 years. She had her reasons. She did, he nodded. And she gave them to you in the end. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking you for confession. I only want to tell you. He paused, working out the exact shape of what he wanted to say. The women in this family have always been the ones who hold it together, not the men. The men are dramatic. They fall and they rise and they make grand decisions, but the women hold. He looked at her steadily. Rosa has been here for 40 years. Marco's mother held this family together for 15 years, while his father... He stopped. What I'm saying is that staying is not a small thing. It is a large thing. And I think you know that too. Yes, she said. Good. He stood, slowly. He looked at the bookshelves one more time. Dante, he said approvingly, seeing the copy on the table beside her chair. A man who knew about complicated journeys. He smiled, small, worn, genuine. Tell Marco I'll find him in the study. He left, and she sat with the Dante, and the house breathed around her, and the April afternoon light came through the library windows in long planes that caught the dust moving in the air and made something beautiful of it. That evening, in the garden, the yellow roses opened. She found him there. She always found him there, eventually, as if the rose wall was where the current between them always resolved. Standing in the long April light, with his sleeves rolled and his hands at his sides, looking at the first yellow roses of the year. She stood beside him. I need to go back to the hospital eventually, she said. I know. And this, she gestured, meaning the estate, the life, the whole architecture of it. This isn't... I know, he said. We'll figure it out. The specific echo of what she had said in the kitchen, we'll figure out the rest, landed between them, deliberate. She looked at the yellow roses. She thought of all the things that had led to this garden. Her mother at a party in 1990, and the man she'd met there, and the daughter she'd had alone, and raised alone, and made strong and independent and capable of carrying secrets. She thought of a phone call at 2:47 in the morning, and a drive through the winter city, and a man bleeding on a leather sofa, and 11 days of captivity that had not been captivity, and a photograph on a desk, and a voice from her father, who was a stranger, and 2 glasses of Barolo at midnight, and a hand held in both of his in the amber light. She thought, this is my life. I am choosing it. The roses are beautiful, she said. They are, he agreed. They always come back. She turned to look at him, the full face, the scar through the eyebrow, the quality of contained force now containing something warmer, the man who had said, I love you, in a rose bed in March, and had meant it, and had continued every day since to mean it in the specific way that people mean things they cannot unsay. He looked back at her with everything present. Come inside, she said. In a minute, he said, not moving, looking at the roses. Marco. In a minute. And there was in his voice something she had heard only rarely, a quality of ease, of presence without management, of a man who had stopped for a minute being the Don of the Conti family, and was simply a man, standing in a garden in April, watching roses open. She stayed beside him. The April air was warm now, genuinely warm. The argument with winter finally resolved. Somewhere in the pines at the estate's edge, a bird was saying something repeated and insistent. The fountain, running again since the thaw, moved the air with the sound of water. Villa Serena, she thought. Serena. Maybe, she thought. Against all odds. Maybe. She took his hand. He held it without looking at her, looking at the roses, and they stood in the garden until the light failed, and then they went inside together, the old iron gate standing open at the drive's end, the house warm with lamplight, and roses cooking, and the accumulated breath of all the years it had stood, watching the world be difficult, and occasionally, improbably, beautiful. The call from Alexei Sorokin came on a Tuesday in September. She was at Mass General, back since June, emergency medicine, the only world she was as fluent in as the other one, the two worlds now coexisting in her life with the imperfect and sturdy logic of chosen things. She took the call in a corridor between patients, leaning against the wall with her white coat and her stethoscope, and the specific quality of attention she brought to everything. "I'd like to meet you," he said. No preamble. The same voice, cold and precise, and, she thought now, familiar in a way she had been avoiding. She thought about it. She thought about what Marco had said when she'd told him the call might come. Your decision. All of it. Coffee, she said. Public place. I choose it. Of course, he said, and I'll tell Marco beforehand. A pause. Of course, he said again. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to her patients, and at the end of her shift she drove north on 93 with the September evening light coming golden through the trees, and pulled through the iron gate that stood open as it always stood open now. She had her own code, she had her own room that had become not the blue guest room, but a different room, and then not a room, but a life. And she found Marco in the study. He looked up when she came in. That look, all of it present. He called, she said. I know. He had known before she said it, some system of information that operated at the margins of things she understood. What did you decide? She sat in her chair, the one that had been hers since the first week, that Rosa had stopped offering to anyone else. Coffee, she said. I'm meeting him for coffee. He held her gaze. The chessboard, the thing under the chessboard. All right, he said. I'll tell you everything after, she said. Everything he says. I know you will. He paused. And Elena. Yes. Be careful. He said it the way he said the things that mattered, simply, without theatre, with the full weight of what he meant. I'm always careful, she said. I'm my mother's daughter. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, the thing that had become ordinary to her, the ordinary, extraordinary thing, the window open. You're yours, he said. That's enough. She held his gaze across the amber light of the study that was theirs, in the house that breathed around them, with the September evening coming in through the window, and the roses on the south wall still blooming, past their season, insisting. This novel is a work of fiction. The families, crimes, and events depicted are imaginary. The roses are real. They always come back.